Death has always fascinated and terrified us, but sometimes it isn't just the inevitability of death that chills us to the bone, it's the strange and almost scripted ways that it unfolds. So imagine narrowly escaping a disaster only to die days later in a bizarre chain of events. This isn't a movie plot, okay? This actually happened in real life. These are the stories that feel too coincidental, too cleanly tragic to be random. They're the real-world echoes of the Final Destination films where fate appears to have a blueprint, and no matter how far you run, it catches up. These cases don't just haunt our imaginations, they challenge our understanding of cause and effect, of probability, and maybe even of fate itself. So we're gonna first start talking about the curse of Flight 191 survivors. So on May 25th, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 crashed just moments after takeoff from Chicago O'Hare Airport, killing all 271 people on board, and it remains the deadliest aviation accident on US soil. But what most people don't know is that several passengers missed that flight. One such story involves a woman named Melanie who missed the flight because her taxi got stuck in traffic. She was reportedly shaken but grateful to be alive, but just 3 days later, while on a different leg of her trip, she was killed in a freak accident involving a falling sign right outside of her hotel. Investigators would later describe it as a freak structural failure. Had she not missed her flight, she would have died anyway, just in a different location. This story, whether an urban legend or grounded in truth, taps into a primal fear that you can't cheat death once, can't cheat it twice. It's just a reoccurring theme in many such stories. Then we have the case of the 2 atomic bombs. So in a story so surreal that it seems fictional, Tuoshu Yagashi survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings in 1945. He was in Hiroshima on a business trip when the first bomb dropped. Injured but still alive, he made his way home to Nagasaki only to experience the second atomic blast days later. He lived to his 90s, but his story raises difficult questions. So was this the worst luck in history or something else? How can someone survive 2 of the most devastating events in human history? If Final Destination is about escaping one deadly fate only to be caught up by another, this guy's case feels like a profound exception or a terrifying illustration of fate trying its best and failing every time. Then you got the whole death by design, and here we got the firefighter's coincidence story. So in 2003, a New York firefighter named Steven was supposed to work on a different shift, but a colleague asked to switch. That change landed him on a duty at a residential building fire, and he survived a partial collapse that crushed the firefighters who were originally scheduled. Feeling guilt and calling it divine intervention, Steven began journaling about fate. 3 months later, while off duty and walking past a construction site, a piece of scaffolding broke loose from a high floor and it struck and killed him instantly. The city ruled it an accident, but many fellow firefighters couldn't shake the eerie timing. Steven had cheated death only to be taken out in a way that nobody could have seen coming. Now we have the mysterious death of David Booth. So David Booth was an aviation safety inspector from Cincinnati, and he began having vivid, disturbing dreams in the early 1980s. In these dreams, he saw a jetliner losing control shortly after takeoff and crashing into flames. The dreams were so specific and consistent that he reported them to the FAA. Then, 10 days later, Delta Airlines Flight 191 crashed during landing at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in almost the exact manner that he described. The tragedy killed 137 people. Booth wasn't on the flight, nor was he scheduled to be. He died of natural causes years later. Still, the question lingered. Had he somehow been tuned into a pre-written script? What stands out isn't that he escaped death itself, but that he saw it coming in vivid detail. And if death has a design, what does it mean for someone to receive the plans? Now we have the chain reaction accidents here. There are some of the most uncanny deaths that involve bizarre sequences of events that almost seem orchestrated. Take the case of Ronald Opus, who is a man who allegedly died from a shotgun blast while falling from a building. So as the story goes, this guy jumped from a high-rise intending to commit suicide. Mid-fall, he passed a window where a shotgun blast went off and killed him. The shooter had been arguing with his wife and hadn't intended to hit anyone, but ironically, the gun had been loaded by the jumper himself weeks earlier, hoping to cause chaos in that house and eventually get them to turn the gun on each other. The story is often cited in law school hypotheticals, and while its authenticity is debated, the point remains that death sometimes comes in the most convoluted, horrifying, and poetic ways. Now we have death and irony, which we have the zip tie choke. So in 2014, a warehouse worker named Miguel in Los Angeles was helping load shipments when a box of zip ties fell from a shelf and knocked him unconscious. No one saw the accident happen. Hours later, he was found dead, having suffocated when the ties wrapped tightly around his neck during the fall. That is straight out of the Final Destination movie. The zip ties meant for, bundling and organizing became the tool of a bizarre, unexplainable accident. Safety protocols were in place. Miguel was healthy, aware, and experienced, yet the manner of death bordered on satirical, as if reality were scripted by a writer with a really dark sense of humor. Now we have a missing bullet, which is freak survivals that didn't even last. There are cases where people survive unbelievable events only to be taken out by something absurd days later. One well-known case involved a soldier in Afghanistan who survived an IED blast that destroyed his vehicle and killed 3 others, but miraculously he was unharmed, and then he returned home to Virginia, but just 2 weeks later, he died with a tree branch when it fell during a storm and struck his car. The vehicle wasn't moving and it was parked. What are the odds that someone walks away from a war zone only to die in a driveway? And why these stories matter, okay? These aren't just anecdotes for the macabre. They're forcing us to confront deep questions like, are we underestimating the power of chaos, and do probabilities sometimes behave like patterns? Is fate just a name that we give to coincidence that feels too personal? These real-world cases echo the Final Destination films, not because they're supernatural, but because they're precise, poetic, and terrifyingly unavoidable. They blur the lines between random chance and orchestrated outcome. Some will argue that it's just probability at work, that with enough events and enough people, strange coincidences are inevitable, but that doesn't make them less eerie. In fact, it makes them more so, because if this is just math, then death is the ultimate statistic. So if you cheat death once, does it come back for you? This question sits at the heart of every Final Destination movie, but it also echoes through thousands of years of mythology, religion, and real-world experience. Some people believe that fate is linear, a single timeline with fixed events, but others suggest something darker, a looping force that corrects itself, hunting down what it missed the first time. In this chapter, we'll explore what we call the fate loop theory. And this is the idea that fate, like gravity or magnetism, is a force seeking balance. So when you avoid a deadly outcome, it doesn't disappear, it waits and, recurs, and sometimes it returns with terrifying precision. So let's go with the mythology and ancient belief systems. So long before Final Destination made the idea famous, ancient cultures wrestled with the concept of inescapable fate. The Greeks had the Moradi of fates, these divine sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of life. So Clotho spun the thread, and Lachesis measured it, and then Atropos cut it while your time was up. Even the gods of Olympus couldn't overrule their decisions. Once the thread was cut, there was no going back. In Norse mythology, the Norns performed a similar role, recording the fate of every being. Even mighty Odin, who knew his own death in Ragnarok, could not escape what was written. In Hinduism, karma acts as a sort of fate in motion, suggesting that actions in one life ripple into the next. And in Buddhism, the concept of samsara depicts the life as a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, with suffering as a reoccurring theme until enlightenment is achieved. These beliefs suggest not just fate, but reoccurring fate, which is a loop system. So here are survivors who felt hunted. We've all heard the anecdotes of people who cheated death only to later feel like they were being stalked by something invisible. Take the case of Gregory Katz, who was a commercial diver who survived a near-death experience when a pressure valve failed. He was clinically dead for over 2 minutes before being revived. In interviews, Katz described having dreams of drowning every night afterwards. He eventually quit diving, but in a very dark twist, he later died while helping neighbors during a flood, trapped under a submerged vehicle. Another example was Eliza Rourke, a woman who survived the pile-up highway accident. Days later, she began documenting strange electrical malfunctions in her house, dreamed of road collapsing and walking visions. Her diary, later recovered by her family, ended with the line, "I don't think I'm supposed to be here anymore." She died less than a week later in another accident while on the way to her therapist's office. So now we have fate as a force. Science meets metaphor. The fate loop theory doesn't require belief in magic or the supernatural. Some physicists and philosophers have theorized about time and determinism in ways that eerily parallel it. So we have deterministic universes. So if we live in a deterministic universe, then everything is casually linked. So in theory, if we knew the position and speed of every particle in the universe, we could predict every future event. While quantum mechanics complicates this, many thinkers still believe in some form of soft determinism. So in such a system, escaping death may just cause the universe to recalculate a new path to the same result. Now you have the block universe theory. This view of space-time treats the past, present, and future as equally real and unchanging. You can no more escape the future than the past. So if your death is embedded in space-time, dodging it once doesn't change the map. You just take a different road to the same destination, or the final destination. And then you have the chaos theory. This branch of mathematics explores how small changes can lead to vastly different outcomes. In the context of the fate loop, avoiding death could trigger a series of events that close this loop later in an unexpected and more dramatic way. Now let's talk about cultural superstitions that mirror this loop. So even everyday superstition reflects this idea, and many people believe that even if they avoid death once, they must be extra cautious because shortly after, soldiers returning from war often reported survivor's guilt and an irrational belief that their luck is borrowed, not earned. In Chinese culture, the number 4 is associated with death because it sounds like the word for death. The avoidance of death is seen as temporary. You delay it, you don't beat it. In Appalachian folklore, tales abound of people who saw a death omen and survived a tragedy, only to be killed weeks later in a similarly violent or ironic way. These stories serve as a form of psychological pattern recognition. We're wired to see patterns, even if those patterns are horrifying. Now let's talk about the butterfly effect, which we all know about the butterfly effect, okay? But small changes can ripple into fate. Let's say you miss a train that later crashes. You're safe, but now your entire timeline's shifted. The person you would have sat next to is gone. The cab you take instead of the train hits a detour that puts you in the path of a different event. It's not hard to imagine how a single skipped heartbeat, misstep, or blinking red light could spell out an entire new fate. Not for better or worse, it's just inevitable. Now let's talk about the philosophical implications. Are we destined, though? If fate is real, then do we really have free will? And this is something tough that we all have to, kind of talk about. So Stoics believed in embracing fate, not resisting it. So the concept of amor fati, or the love of fate, suggests that we should just accept whatever happens as part of a greater cosmic order, which I personally believe in. But modern philosophy asks deeper questions. If fate exists, then why do some people get warnings? Why do some survive disasters repeatedly while others don't get a second chance? Could it be that fate isn't a one-time event, but a reoccurring force, one that doesn't care about the individual so much as about the cosmic balance? But why the fate loop? Why do we have a fate loop? Final Destination works as a movie franchise, not because of the kills, but because it echoed something primal in us. That feeling that something bigger, colder, and more calculating might be out there. Not a ghost, not a demon, but just a system, like a loop. One that watches you get away and waits to close the circle. Whether you believe in destiny, karma, physics, or pure coincidence, the truth is that the fate loop theory offers a terrifying but oddly comforting idea that death doesn't make mistakes. It just takes its time. Now let's jump right into chapter 3, and we're going to talk about the physics and chaos theory. So if death has a design, then perhaps it's written in not mythology or fate, but physics, probability, and chaos. The Final Destination films may be fictional, but the intricate chain reactions that kill its characters are rooted in real principles that govern our universe. In this chapter, we're going to explore how the laws of motion, energy transfer, and randomness can explain the seemingly impossible, and how physics often writes a story more chilling than any supernatural force. So let's talk about the domino effect. The idea of chain reaction deaths often begin with something small: a loose bolt, a flickering cigarette, a wobbling ladder. These minor actions set off a series of mechanical events that seem to move with intent, but are in reality a natural progression of energy and momentum. This is Newton's first law in action. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by another force. In Final Destination style events, each component in the chain reaction becomes a domino, transferring energy and motion until the final blow lands, usually with eerie precision. Real life example, in 2012, a man in Brazil was killed when a traffic barrier malfunctioned. The barrier, which was supposed to stop cars, broke, rebounded into the air, and struck the man's motorcycle helmet in just the wrong angle. Investigators concluded that a combination of wind pressure and mechanical fatigue caused the event, a real-world example of cascading force creating a deadly timing. Now let's have the butterfly effect. Small causes, catastrophic effects. Chaos theory is often summed up by the phrase, "A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, causes a tornado in Texas," yada yada. While it's a metaphor, the principle is very real. Chaos theory states that a small change in initial conditions may lead to a vastly different outcome. This has been demonstrated through weather patterns, ecological models, and even the stock market. But the context of human life, it means this: the smallest misstep, a mistimed blink, a misplaced object can start a chain reaction that ends in tragedy. In 2004, a woman in Pennsylvania died after a kitchen drawer fell open behind her. She turned to close it, knocking a wine bottle off of a counter. This bottle shattered on the floor, she slipped on the glass, fell backwards, and struck her temple on the edge of the sink. All it took was seconds. None of it could have been predicted, but every single moment was governed by the rules of physics. Now let's talk about energy transfer and the uncanny precision of accidents. When we see complex accidents play out, like a falling ladder, tipping a paint can that triggers a fan that pulls a curtain into a candle, we instinctively look for meaning. It feels scripted, but what we're really seeing is the transfer of kinetic, thermal, and potential energy in accordance with physics. This is why Rube Goldberg machines are so mesmerizing. They're intricate, but deterministic, and sometimes real life mirrors them really too well. In 2007, there's a case in Chicago that involved a construction worker who died when a dropped tool bounced off of a scaffolding, struck a crane's safety latch, and released a metal beam. This beam fell exactly where the worker had just moved to take a phone call. OSHA described the event as a perfect storm of timing and motion. Physics doesn't need intent, it only needs conditions. So now we have the probability and illusion of impossibility. Many of these Final Destination style deaths feel impossible, but improbable isn't the same as impossible. When enough time and enough events, even a 0.001% chance becomes a guarantee. Statisticians refer to this as the law of large numbers. The more opportunities something has to happen, the more likely it eventually will. This is why freak accidents do happen. They're just spread thinly across millions of lives. Take the case of Alan Thompson, who died in 2018 after tripping over a garden hose. The fall caused a decorative spear mounted to a wall to dislodge and impale him. The odds of such a scenario were almost infinitesimal, but not zero. And then given enough people, time, and wall-mounted spears, it was bound to happen at some time. Now let's talk about the systems theory and cascading failures. Another way to understand the Final Destination style deaths is through systems theory. In complex systems like cities, machinery, or even human society, small failures can cascade into massive breakdowns. Airplane crashes, blackouts, and ecological collapses often happen this way. So a microcosm of daily life, so do freak accidents happen this way. If one screw loosens, it affects the structure. If one timer fails, the whole rhythm shifts. In the worst case scenarios, everything fails at once. Consider the infamous Love Parade disaster in Germany from 2010, where small crowd control missteps led to a domino effect of panic, collapse, and death. Physics wasn't just present, it was center stage, determining flow, rate, pressure points, and mechanical stress on the bodies. The perception of fate versus physical reality. Our minds are wired to search for intention. It's called apophenia, which is the human tendency to perceive connections and patterns between unrelated things. So when a series of mechanical failures leads to death, we see purpose, not process. But the universe doesn't need a scriptwriter, it just needs variables. This is the core tension in the Final Destination style deaths. They feel orchestrated, but they're actually just organic. Nature, machinery, and human behavior converge in ways that appear meaningful, but are often just physics unfolding according to its rules, and very unfortunate for its victims. So it's basically just a universe without mercy, okay? Physics has no conscience, okay? Gravity doesn't discriminate. Thermodynamics doesn't care who you are. If a 1,000-pound beam falls on you, standing beneath it, you're not gonna get a pass just because you almost died last week. That's what makes Final Destination style deaths so terrifying. They're reminders that the world operates on principles, not compassion. And those principles, when aligned just right, can form the perfect storm, okay? So we have a clockwork of catastrophe here. We have a fate loop that might feel personal, but chapter 3 tells us that many of these events don't require fate. They require motion. Physics writes our own horror stories using screws, glass, force, mass, and time. And once the first domino falls, the rest will just obey based on the laws of physics. There's no ghosts, no spirits, just momentum. And sometimes that's more terrifying than anything supernatural, because we can't control anything that happens to us in life, and this can happen to any of us at any time. Don't let this nihilistic science and math get you down, because this next chapter is about premonitions and gut feelings. So not every brush with death comes through physical cues or mechanical failures. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper in the mind, a chill down the spine, or a gut feeling that you just can't ignore. In this chapter, we'll explore the eerie realm of premonitions, those intuitive flashes that seem to warn of danger, and the science and psychology that may help explain them. So let's talk about premonitions in history. The phenomenon of premonitions is older than civilization itself. Ancient Rome in general Ancient Roman generals were known to delay battles due to omens or dreams. In China, entire dynasties recorded celestial warnings and the appearance of strange animals as signs of coming calamity. The Aztecs claimed that they foresaw the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors through supernatural visions and symbols in nature. And in the modern era, stories of premonitions surfacing disasters, big and small, from 9/11 to Titanic to everyday accidents. People have responded strange dreams, warnings, or bad feelings that later matched real events. Perhaps the most famous example was Abraham Lincoln, who reportedly told his wife in a dream that he had days before his assassination. He talked about a dream in which he wandered the White House and saw a covered body guarded by soldiers lying in the East Room. He asked, "Who is this dead in the White House?" And the soldier answered, "The president." So let's talk about the Titanic warnings. In 1912, there were several passengers reportedly canceled their tickets aboard the RMS Titanic due to feelings of dread. One man, William Stead, who was a British journalist and spiritualist, actually boarded the Titanic and died, but not before writing years earlier a fictional account of a shipwreck eerily similar to the Titanic's fate. Even more unsettling, in 1898, 14 years before the disaster, American author Morgan Robertson published a novella titled Futilely, later retitled The Wreck of the Titan, which described an unsinkable ocean liner named Titan being hit by an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic. How do we explain these eerie parallels? Are they coincidence, or are they a collective subconscious tapping into something larger? So let's talk about the science of intuition. Premonitions may seem mystical, but they may also have roots in biology. Neuroscience suggests that our brains are prediction machines. They constantly process massive amounts of data, most of it unconsciously, and then they build simulations of possible futures. This is why experienced drivers sometimes react to danger before it even happens. Their brains have picked up subtle cues without even having conscious awareness of it. This subconscious processing could explain gut feelings or sudden dread. It's not magic, it's just pattern recognition operating faster than our thoughts can. In fact, researchers at Northwestern University found that people often exhibit measurable changes in heart rate, skin conductivity, and brain waves seconds before viewing disturbing or emotional imagery. It's like some form of anticipating process. So let's talk about the dreams as warning systems here. Our dreams are symbolic, emotional, and occasionally prophetic. But are they just our brain's way of defragging thoughts, or are they tapping into something deeper? Carl Jung believed in a concept called the collective consciousness, which is a reservoir of shared memories and archetypes across humanity. Jung claimed that dreams could offer genuine insight into future events, especially if they were vivid, repetitive, or emotionally charged. There's also precognitive dreaming, which many people claim to experience. While science remains skeptical due to the lack of reproducibility, anecdotal accounts are staggering. Entire books have been written compiling stories of people who dreamed plane crashes, illness, and even natural disasters, only to see them happen later. Is this clairvoyance, or is this the brain running billions of simulations occasionally and just getting it right? Now let's talk about premonition or pattern seeking. Okay, so humans are natural storytellers. We connect dots even whenever the dots don't really exist. So how do we separate true premonition from retroactive pattern matching? Cognitive science calls this confirmation bias. So our tendency to notice information that confirms our beliefs and ignores what doesn't. We remember the dream that came true, but we forget the 50 that didn't. And yet, the sheer number of documented cases, especially those that tied to major disasters, begs further investigation. So maybe premonitions aren't supernatural, but they're just evolutionary, an adaptive function to anticipate threats in chaotic environments. So let's talk about real-life premonitions that defy explanation, though. We have Joplin from Missouri in 2011, just before a devastating EF5 tornado hit Joplin. Many residents reported a deep sense of dread. One school teacher claimed that she had packed an emergency supplies in her car that morning without knowing why, but then hours later, her school was gone. And then on 9/11, numerous stories emerged after the attacks of people they skipped work due to having a bad feeling. One man, Robert Codley, changed his route to work last minute after his daughter begged him to stay home. His office was in the North Tower. Then you have the tsunami in Thailand in 2004. An American tourist named Julie reported feeling so uncomfortable that she decided to leave the beach for the hills that morning. When the tsunami hit hours later, her hotel was completely destroyed. These stories don't really prove anything conclusively, but collectively they paint a strange picture of humans kind of tuning into something beyond logic. So, how do you interpret your own gut feelings? whether or not you believe in premonitions, it is wise to listen to your intuition. Here's a few ways to approach this. So we have pattern recognition. So ask yourself what clues you might be unconsciously noting, okay? Like what are you noticing? What's going on over and over again? So now let's go into emotional intensity. There are true warnings that tend to carry an unshakable emotional charge. And then there's repetition. If a dream or image keeps coming back, you gotta pay attention to that. And then there's the context. Fear isn't always a warning. It could be anxiety, but just learn to tell the difference, okay? Keeping a dream or intuition journal can help track reoccurring patterns and build a clearer picture over time. Let's talk about this premonition paradox. If you foresee your own death, does that give you the power to stop it, or are you merely confirming that it's meant to happen? This is where premonitions become existential, because are they gifts or are they curses? Are they signal or are they noise? Do they come from within or do they come from something else entirely? In the Final Destination films, the characters receive visions of their own deaths, but trying to avoid them only delays the inevitable. In real life, people have used these feelings to change course, cancel trips, and survive. So maybe the message isn't necessarily that you can cheat death, but maybe it's this. Sometimes death whispers, and then sometimes we hear it. So in this last chapter, we're going to talk about pop culture versus real death. So over the past 2 decades, Final Destination has cemented itself as a cult horror franchise, not for monsters or slashers, but for its bone-chilling exploration of death itself. The films gave form to a fear that many people already feel, that death isn't always chaotic and random, but many think it follows a design. But how much of that horror is cinematic exaggeration, and how much of it reflects something deeply rooted in human experience? In this final chapter, we'll explore how Final Destination reflects real fears, distorts truth, and in some strange cases, mirrors reality. So first we're going to talk about the birth of the franchise. Final Destination wasn't born as a theatrical film. It began as a rejected X-Files episode. Creator Jeffrey Reddick wrote a spec script about a man who avoids a plane crash after a premonition, only to find his life unraveling as those around him begin dying in freak accidents. The episode was never produced, but the script was adapted into the 2000 film, which is one of my favorite films of all time, and its success wasn't just due to inventive death scenes. It tapped into a cultural anxiety about fate, coincidence, and the illusion of control. Man, I remember when this movie came out in 2000. This was before 9/11 happened, and I was already terrified of heights, and I never wanted to get on a plane after seeing this movie. This just really stuck in my head. In 2000, I was, I think, 9 years old when this movie came out. I was born in 91, so yeah, I was not even 10 yet when I saw this. And yeah, this movie stuck with me, this first film, and the rest are good in their own ways for what they do. But yeah, let's continue on why it resonates so deeply. This franchise works because it's grounded in realism, okay? There's no ghosts, demons, or masked killers. It's just mechanical failures, small missteps, and timing, unless you're going based on the comic books and you know what death actually looks like. Psychologists believe that this is part of what makes the movie so disturbing. So unlike supernatural horror, the scenarios in Final Destination feel plausible. You could trip on a wire, a shelf could fall, a gas leak could ignite. The films speak directly to our fear of the ordinary become deadly. They also mirror something called existential dread, the creeping awareness that we have very little control over the forces that shape our lives. In a world where people die in absurd ways all over the world all the time, the line between fiction and reality becomes increasingly blurred. So the real deaths that could have been movie scenes, like over the years, fans and critics alike have pointed out news stories that feel like deleted scenes from the franchise. And like here's just a few examples. One is the roller coaster incident from 2007, which actually came out a year after the third movie about the roller coaster, when a 17-year-old South Carolina was decapitated by a roller coaster after entering a restricted area to retrieve a lost hat. The death was caused not by a malfunction, but by a perfect storm of just poor judgment and timing. And then there's a gym accident, which is very similar to the fifth film, when a man was bench pressing without a spotter, dropped a barbell on his throat, and the safety rack had been removed to make room for a camera tripod. And then there's the elevator tragedy, which directly mirrors a scene from the second film. A woman in Houston was crushed by an elevator after a malfunction and ascended while the doors were still open and she was halfway inside. Each of these cases shares the Final Destination DNA, seemingly preventable, painfully ironic, and horrifyingly real. So Here's when pop culture influences perception. Okay, there's also a reverse effect to this. So after the movies gained popularity, people began interpreting their own near misses as part of a design. I do the same thing, man. I feel like I was in Final Destination is a common phrase on social media. It's used whenever someone narrowly avoids injury, missing a bus before it crashes, stepping away from a falling object, surviving a fender bender by inches. The franchise has, in a way, created a language for discussing uncanny survival. It's made people hyper aware of coincidence, and that's both powerful and potentially problematic. While it raises awareness, it can also fuel anxiety and paranoia. For some, surviving a freak accident leads not to gratitude but to dread, and then they begin waiting for the next shoe to drop. So pop culture versus statistical reality. Despite what Final Destination implies, real-world freak accidents are rare. Overwhelmingly, majority of deaths are due to chronic illness and not elaborate Rube Goldberg scenarios. But when freak accidents do occur, they stand out. They're sticky, our brains remember them because they're very unusual. The movies, they really exaggerate the frequency, but not the mechanism. Physics, probability, and system failures are all real threats. It's just that real life doesn't always package them with cinematic pacing or poetic irony. So when fiction teaches us something true, ironically, for all these, the exaggeration, Final Destination has taught some important real life lessons, like don't ignore the red flags, strange sounds, loose bolts, odd smells. These are how real accidents normally start. So listen to your gut. Intuition isn't magic, okay? It's the brain detecting patterns. We are smart. We're powerful beings, guys. This is crazy, okay? Nothing is truly safe, though. Safety is a process. It's not a guarantee. So even everyday actions require your attention. In that sense, Final Destination becomes a strange kind of public safety announcement, one wrapped in gore, but, rooted in truth. We watch horror to process our fear, and in the Final Destination films, the fear isn't just about dying, but it's about having no say in the matter. The franchise kind of stripped away choice, showing that even your survival is temporary, and yet it gave us something in return. And it's a language for chaos. It's a mirror for coincidence and a reminder to pay attention to our surroundings and just be as careful as we can possibly be, because sometimes death doesn't sneak up on you. It can circle back and can get you again. And when it does, it won't miss twice. Okay, this has been the Vault Files. I hope you enjoy this. I wanted to get this video out before Final Destination Bloodlines comes out in May. I'm a huge fan of the Final Destination films. I've grown up with them. They're great. And I would like to do more on this. I really like this whole concept. So I don't really want to nerd out about this too much and make this video go on longer than it has, but I could nerd out about this for hours at a time. So if you want to talk more about this, please kind of join our Patreon, and I would love to do a live on this and talk to you guys about all of these concepts of death and avoiding it and just pattern recognition and all that stuff. Don't make me nerd about this right now, okay? Message me, talk to me, send me messages, do whatever you gotta do. I'm totally down for it, because talking about movies and stuff like this is my passion, guys. Especially the Final Destination films. The first Final Destination is one of the first horror movies I grew up with, after obviously seeing Poltergeist from 1982. That was my start into horror, but Final Destination is one of those films that stuck with me as a kid, and to this day is one of my favorites. And I'm going to be posting short form content from this video on TikTok and Instagram. So if you're seeing this on short form content, which you're probably not going to see this end bit on it, just go to YouTube, watch the full video. It's gonna be a longer video because I had a lot to talk about with this one. But yeah, that's all I got. Yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe and hit notification and comment, because I want to talk to you guys about this, because I love these movies so much. So yes, let's continue this discussion. If you guys want a part 2, or if you have any suggestions for future videos, I would love to hear them from you guys. Thank you so much, and you have a great day.